Right, so I just had another couple things I wanted to get to concerning the last few videos I made. Um, my appendix preface video, which I'm trying to post right now, uh, which had this picture. And then, let's see. Um, that's a cool picture. I guess I'll get to that. And then one of the things I was talking about symbols, like this picture here, where it's similar. It's similar to one of my recent posts. It was made essentially one of my recent posts was a picture I made by taking another picture I had made, shifting it slightly over itself, and then animating it, doing a color animation. And this one was the same preliminary picture, just shifted in a different way, which created an even more textual image, in so much as these in the middle look especially Gothic or pre-Gothic text. I'm not saying that's exactly how I think pure text exists ideally, but I think it speaks very, very, very strongly to that. And another thing about noting text like this is that we can envision it almost like looking at the stars in the sky, if we believe the modern view. And I don't necessarily believe modern, ancient, whatever. I take it all into account because if we don't know it and we can't prove it for ourselves, for instance, anybody who references Copernicus or Galileo who doesn't know Copernican and Galilean math and astronomy, you know, if you can't relate back to the exact math itself, then you don't know it. You know, and I refer to people and I refer to things, and I'm guilty of it. I'm guilty of the thing that I accuse others of. Yes, I am. But that doesn't mean that I or others are off the hook, and I don't like to say, oh, well, it's only human or anything like that. Like, at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, there is a perfection. Anyway, when I'm talking about anything, basically anything I ever say can just be considered a toy model. It's just a way of thinking. But looking at text like this, we can think of looking at the sky, not in the way the quote-unquote ancients would have thought of the, you know, glass sphere. And I'm not saying that's incorrect. Because we can think of, well, we could think of an ideal sphere. We could think of an ideal sphere that is the shape of the universe the way modern people talk about it, because an ideal shape, you know, idealism refers to also imaginary numbers, real and imaginary numbers, complex numbers. And if you're dealing with real and imaginary numbers as being what composes time, then you could have peculiar topological surfaces like macrame, um, bent, very odd surfaces in space, that in space-time, that including quote-unquote imaginary numbers, would be perfectly spherical, depending upon the distribution of forces of the real and imaginary components. So ideally they could be spherical. Anyway, like looking through like a sphere, or looking, it's like almost looking into the sky. So what looks like text here could only be like the shadow areas or the light areas could be spread, very far out. So that, if we were looking down something, if we were looking down something more or less tubular, there could be dots of light spread here, there, everywhere, in such a way that when you looked at it at a certain way, there were shadows in places and there was light in places, and unlike this, where it actually, the shadow and light is more or less in a plane, we could imagine this green area being just separate little dots up and down this tube, creating this image instead of it being like it is. But I think that's how text is anyway. I think that's how like real text and real sound is anyway. In one sense. In another sense, they could be, it depends on how far or back that distribution is. So you could have something like a tack, what is it, a tack, that little toy, or a dreidel or something, where it's turned in a certain direction away from the center and looks different, or just like a hand. My hand is something, and if this were the center and this is my hand, like all the shapes, shadow puppets, Cthulhian shadow puppets of space-time is text. And form, and, everything else. So that was one thing I wanted to touch upon about real symbolism and so on. So what I'm doing is just a way to try to touch upon something else, something bigger. So that was one thing. And then another thing was, I used this image in my last video, or not in my last video, but in a few videos back. And it's, I guess, one thing I didn't really point out, which is, I guess, pretty obvious, but like, this up here, that looks like a dude. And like, people talk about gnosis and all that knowledge. Gnosis, I guess, means knowledge, and they use gnosis in the Bible, and it's all throughout, Greek philosophy. And one of the things, and it's not my idea, but I've heard it stated, is that really when it goes back to it, like, that the Bible is maybe like the synopsis of Greek geometry, or of Greek philosophy. Like, Greek philosophy ends at the Bible, is one way that some people look at the Bible and Greek philosophy. So like, it has to be considered the Bible, including the New Testament, it has to be considered that way, if it's considered at all. The only reason I'm mentioning that is because in this particular image, which is particularly facial, so you have a bunch of text, you have this very, I don't know if it's like Dan Wilton Orion like type of an image or not, but it certainly speaks to it. But there's a very facial image. There's like an empty nose, skull and crossbone, empty nose type thing, with what looks like a keyhole in the middle, which really really emphasizes the nose. Um, no nose. I don't know. Um, as far as just structures and symbolism goes, and I know I'm just hammering on symbolism, and I don't even know about it. But what little I know about it screams from this. And once again, this image was just created from a series of multiple Archimedes spirals. This entire radius being less than 7, or about 7 maybe. This entire radius being about 7. And this is a circle around which I had about the same size circles circled around, creating Archimedes spirals around. So even within a very small number, which I guess because of the overlaps is very big, and I'm starting to reach back into things, but like ultimately I still haven't even figured out the number 1. But in one image, from many images from one image, I have something very textual, something very facial, something very like cosmological, universal, something which seems like very structural, and what looks very complicated, what looks very textual. And then you have these other text-like things coming up through here, which start to look a little bit more Middle Eastern. Some of my other images of it show that a little more. And then this again was something produced from a lot of the same preliminary images. And you just get a lot of what looks like quote-unquote ancient structure, more ancient text, structure and text at the same time. So that's another kind of important thing. And then another thing was that, if I can get to it, when I was talking about this deal, let's see, the root 1 by root 2 by root 3, SoundBrick, I played all 6 together, but what I never did was play each individual tone. So root 1, Lightfoot, wavelength, root 1, Lightfoot, wavelength, interpreted through cycles per second. AKA approximately 1144 hertz. And then root 2, Lightfoot, wavelength, interpreted through cycles per second, aka approximately 809 hertz. And then root 3, Lightfoot wavelength interpreted through cycles per second, aka 600, approximately 661 hertz. And then root 4, blobbity 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 blah, aka 572 hertz. That's an interesting number. As far as like 5s and 12s go. Speaking of 5s and 12s, root 5, blobbity blah. And then root 6, Lightfoot wavelengths interpreted as cycles per second. Aka 467 hertz. So that was one more thing I wanted to get to. And then also, I'd said that all of them together didn't really sound very good. But it depends on my mood. Sometimes it sounds very nice. And of course, it depends on the way in which I made the sound in the first place. You know, through a flute, this might sound absolutely gorgeous. And then the other thing I never really talked about was on this guy, which is the root 1 Lightfoot, root 2 Lightfoot, root 3 Lightfoot, was the areas. So let's see, root 3 by root 5. So this area is root 2 by root 5. So this area is what, root 10. And that's root 1 by root 2, so that area is root 2. That's root 1 by root 3, so that area is root 3. This is root 10. And then the whole thing is root 1 by root 2 by root 3. So root 1 times root 2 times root 3 is root 2 times root 3. Whoops. Root 2 times root 3, 6. So area 2, area 3, area 6, and then the whole thing, or I'm sorry, root 6, area root 2, area root 3, area root 6. So this entire brick has an area of root 6. And that's not uninteresting. Yeah, I just thought I'd finish off more of this guy. Here I've kind of shrunk the height. So that was an artificial manipulation. I guess they're all artificial manipulations, but you know, I made it smaller this way just to see what it would look like.